music, science. It's the Amoeba People Podcast. Greetings and welcome to the Amoeba People Podcast, the show where science and music collide. Collide's a bit of an exaggeration. It's really like an old school dance from the 50s where music says to science, pardon me, but may I have this dance? And science says, well, of course. And science and music stroll out onto the dance floor and they wind up winning the dance contest after they've outlasted the Fonz and Pinky Tuscadero. My name is Ray Hedgepeth, the singer-guitarist of the indefatigably nerdy science rock band, the Amoeba People. So indefatigably nerdy that we actually spend time making sure we pronounce indefatigably correctly. And today's show is so exciting because I got the chance to sit down with a genuine Mars geologist who is currently mapping the surface of the red planet. Dr. Fred Calef, a geologist and cartographer who works at JPL, and many other titles, by the way, who works at JPL, a legendary facility if ever there was one, is our guest today. And he's going to walk us through the process of how in the world we take geologic concepts of our planet and transfer them to other planets in the solar system. Because not all planets are made the same. Yet the only planet that we can study up close is our own. So Dr. Fred, as the Meebs like to call him, is going to take us through the challenges of studying and mapping the red planet from millions and millions of miles away. We also had two theremins in the room during the interview, and man, did we have some fun with those. You're going to hear more of that. So it's such a great and insightful interview. We're also going to be breaking down our song, Geology Folk Song Medley. Yes, the epic Geology Folk Song Medley, ladies and gentlemen, from our new album, The Fossil Record. That's going to be a ton of fun because writing that was a blast. So we have an incredible episode in store for you today. Now, before we jump into that, I want to ask you to please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or wherever you download this podcast, and please write us a review as well. That's how people find out about it, and that's what the podcast platforms pay attention to. So we know you guys are downloading it and hopefully loving it because we've seen the download numbers, and they are incredible. And we've been downloaded in 25 countries outside of the U.S. So the predominance of our downloads are here in the U.S., but 25 other countries, people in those places have downloaded it and continued to do so. So we know you guys are out there listening to it, and we thank you for that. We love you. We really do. And but if you feel like you can help us out, please give us a rating because it can help us out immensely, and a review where you tell the world what you love about this podcast. That would be phenomenal. So thank you so much. Okay, so let's hop right into the Geology Folk Song Medley. Okay, Geology Folk Song Medley. So this was so, honestly, from just the first idea to the final note recorded was so incredibly fun to see come together. This one was done piece by piece by piece by piece until it became what it is. It's the final song on the album, and I don't want to give too much away because we're going to play the complete song at the end of the episode, the actual recording. So what I'm going to do is I've got the guitar here, and I'm going to break down the songs in the medley. So the first one, and originally this was going to be the song on the album. It was going to be Meandering River, and it was just going to be a song by itself. So, and then I realized Meandering River, it goes like this. Meandering River, you roll on down the plain, eroding and unloading the rocks that you find, until you make an oxbow lake. You know where you're going, where gravity's inclined. Just look at all the wonder that you leave behind, meandering river and time. So that was just going to be a song by itself, like an old cowboy tune, as if, you had cowboys around the fire, but these cowboys were also geologists. So I was thinking they'd be singing, about that old Meandering River. But then the song wasn't long, it was a short song, and it didn't feel like it needed to be longer. Sometimes you start off with an idea and you're like, oh, I need to finish this. But that actually sounded like a finished song to me for some reason. And so I was like, well, we could just do it as a little one-off at the end of the album. It could just be a short little fade-out thing. But then another idea came for a song called The Outcrop in the Sky. So, geologists, they love those outcrops. And there's a geologist, I believe she's in Virginia, Leanne Weiberg. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, because we're just social media friends. We've never met in person, and I don't think we've ever actually talked in person. But she's, we've exchanged messages with her for a long time now. And when we put out a video about, the one for the geologists are coming, she was mentioning why geologists were correcting, or at least criticizing, our use of regular everyday hammers, because the hammer has to be more dense than the rock, or else the hammer can split and can hurt you. And she knew a couple of one-eyed geologists as proof, and so she just was clarifying why geologists were commenting that way. And one of the geologists, the one-eyed geologist she mentioned, she said, just in as a side note, she's like, he's since gone to that outcrop in the sky, which I thought was one of the funniest things I'd ever heard. So, so the outcrop in the sky, of course, to me sounded like another cowboy tune. And that's kind of where this idea came from. It's when our earthly time has run and we face life's setting sun, we're rolling to the outcrop in the sky. We might erode or crystallize, or subduct and orogenize, or just roll on to the outcrop in the sky. So once I had that tune, I was like, okay, well, now I think maybe there's a medley somewhere. Maybe, we can put those two songs together somehow, but they were too similar. So I knew I was going to need to separate them with some other tunes. And so, in came an idea for this one. I was thinking about, what's it called? Something like Empty Saddles in the Old Corral. I think it's an old Sons of the Pioneer. I'm definitely a big fan of the old cowboy tunes. I've got a soft spot in my heart for them. So it might be Empty Saddles in the Old Corral. I can't remember the title of it. Sorry, if I'm such a cowboy song fan, I should know. But the idea came for Empty Tents, because of course the geologists are doing their work. I'm cracking myself up here, just so you know. I find this stuff very funny. So this song, I think, is the one that came next, and it was Empty Tents in the Valley. Where did those geologists go? You can tell I wrote it a little bit above my range, because I was thinking that somebody else would be singing this. So all along I had another vocalist in mind. Are they up on the cliff, or down in the schist, or floating in that river below? Empty tents in the valley. Where did those geologists go? Empty tents in the valley, we may never, ever know. So now I had three tunes, all quite similar, at least in their kind of rhythm and that kind of rolling along. Rolling Along is one of my favorite Gene Autry tunes. And so all three of those kind of had that. That kind of classic cowboy. And so now it was clear a medley was taking shape, but now I needed other songs to help round out the medley. And before I do any of those, I want to mention that this episode is actually divided into two parts, and we're doing that on purpose. Two reasons. First, because the Geology Folk Song Medley has 6 different songs in it. I thought I'd break down the first 3 like I just did. and then save the other 3 for the part 2 episode. And also because our interview with Dr. Fred Calef of JPL was just so big and comprehensive and interesting and fun that I wanted to squeeze in as much of it as I could into a single episode, and it just wouldn't all fit. So that's why we're breaking it up into a part 1 and a part 2. So this kind of officially brings us to the end of part 1 of our breakdown of the Geology Folk Song Medley, Meandering River, Empty Tents in the Valley, and The Outcrop in the Sky. And then I'll be breaking down the other 3 in the next episode, which will be coming out in a couple weeks. And so, because of that, we're not going to be playing the completed version of the Geology Folk Song Medley that appears on the album until the end of part 2. So we're going to keep you in suspense, folks. Now, in the meantime, if you just can't stand the suspense and you must hear the finished version, you can find our album everywhere. You can find it on Bandcamp where you can stream it. And of course you can, hear it on Apple Music and Spotify. It's everywhere. But in the next episode, though, I will be talking about the vocalists that we brought in for this song. 2 incredibly talented vocalists, Ron Butler Jr. and Lisa Bodie Hurd. These people are off the charts talented. And the fact that we got them on the song is just, a point of pride to me. And I'll tell you more about them and, the work that they've done in the past and why it was such a big deal to get them on this recording and then just the fun that we had recording the song. So there you have it, the breakdown of the first 3 songs in the Geology Folk Song Medley, and the next 3 are coming in the next episode, part 2. But since we are in part 1, I did want to break for a commercial announcement. This is extremely, extremely important news that we need to share with you, Amoeba People podcast listeners.
Mars is a jerk. It's the out-of-this-world new album from Dr. Fred Calef and the Amoeba People, featuring Dr. Fred on double theremins.
Double theremins?
That's right, 2 theremins. You'll be hypnotized by the rhythmic beats of the title track, Mars is a Jerk. Travel back in time with Dr. Fred in the autobiographical track entitled, I Was Raised on a Granite Pluton. Shake your booty to the Martian hip-hop vibes of Astronauts Don't Care. Thrill to the unexpected rush of Earth Schmirth. And watch the party people rush the dance floor when the DJ puts on the Goosphere. Mars is a Jerk, the new album from Dr. Fred Calef and the Amoeba People. Available now from M51 Records and sold exclusively in your favorite Martian record stores, with convenient locations throughout the Gale Crater area. And don't forget to visit their new store at Bradbury Landing.
I'm thrilled to share my interview with Dr. Fred Calef of JPL. This was actually the first interview of a guest that I've done right here in the M51 Records studio, aka my house. All the other interviews thus far have been done, like on location at the Raymond Delft Museum or at a hotel or, where someone was staying or via Skype. But for this one, Dr. Fred was able to do the interview here at the M51 Records laboratory. And that was great because I knew he was fascinated by the theremin, as is evidenced by the advertisement you just heard. So I decided to set up not 1, but 2 theremins here in the studio for his interview. And you might have noticed in the commercial for the quote-unquote album we co-created, the titles of the songs were unique. And that's because we lifted the titles from different parts of the interview. So each time we had a spot in the interview where we've lifted a title for a theremin song, you're going to hear this sound. Okay, so here is part 1 of my interview with the truly cosmic Dr. Fred Calef. But no, it's fantastic having right here in the studio Dr. Fred Calef of JPL. Welcome, Fred.
Thank you. Good morning, Ray.
Hey, good morning. So we're just kind of chilling here right now with a couple cups of coffee and some theremins, or thereminai.
Sure.
The plural form of this one right here is actually, do you want to play yours there?
Sure, yes.
Nice. We'll add some effects on that too, so yours can sound as cosmic as this one. I just realized I gave myself the good sounding one.
That's all right. I'm down with low key, old school.
The Jimmy Page style. Yeah. I think this Moog theremin here is called a theremin, and I used to think it was called theramini, but I think it's theramini. I think it means plural theremin because it's got all the different sounds that you can dial in and out of it.
Right. Okay, yeah. But the original inventor of the theremin, right, is Moog.
No, theremin.
No?
Leon Theremin's the original.
Okay.
And then Moog popularized them.
it. Okay,
Definitely.
Okay, my bad.
And those are the ones to buy the Moog. If there's any thereminists out there, you can email us with hate mail if that's not true.
Please correct us with the proper theremins that we should be buying.
But yeah, as far as I know about Leon Theremin, he was a scientist and musician. If I have his story correct, which is always cool because, in fact, before the mics were rolling, we were talking about creativity and you're talking about the amount of creative people at JPL where you work, and that's, I think, again, the more that we've done the Amoeba People, the more we've learned this, that these hard and fast lines that people draw between scientist and regular human or scientist and artist are actually not even really there. Once you actually meet more scientists, you realize how creative you must be actually to be a scientist.
Yeah, and sometimes how creative we have to be. People forget that we're trying to solve problems or get another view on something we see or understand what we see and think of ways that it can happen, or what are the we have some bounding box. There's rocks roll downhill, right? Unless you're on a low gravity planet, they still roll downhill, but not as much force. Anyways, but so we have to think, especially doing planetary science, you start to the normal limits of Earth. So we have this idea of analogs, planetary analogs. So you see a volcano on Earth, you measure it, and then you see something that looks like a volcano on the other planet. You can kind of use those measurements of the volcano here and compare them to the measurements of the volcano there. But every planet is different. They're different sizes, which change the gravity. Some have an atmosphere. Some don't. Some have a really thick atmosphere. So all those start to change the common dynamics. Like we generally see the same. So the general rule in geology is that everything is the things you see now also happened in the past.
Right.
Will also happen in the future, right? So you can predict things that are going to happen, and you can also backwards predict what had happened. But other planets are different gravity, different groups of minerals and different amounts of minerals. Like I said, different atmospheres, different composition of atmospheres. And so then we start to see things that you are hard to explain. I think a simple one, like recently, Scoop, breaking news. No, there was a picture that was released a couple days ago. We're at this really cool butte up near this area we're investigating with the Curiosity rover and Gale Crater. And
by the way, listeners, this is Mars he's talking about.
Oh, yeah, this is Mars. Sorry. I just live on Mars.
When you live on Mars, it's a normal day.
It's every day. It is... okay, this is going to be I'll loop back to what I was saying before. But... they talk about the overview effect when astronauts go in space and they see the whole planet.
Right.
I think there's something equivalent of the ground effect, where if you're looking at pictures of Mars rovers all day long, your brain sinks into that view because the pictures are taken about the height of a human. So you feel like you're there.
Right.
You see the rocks, they're at the right distance. You're like, oh, I could reach down and grab that. I'm looking in the distance, I see these hills. Oh, I see this old stream channel or things I might be lake beds. You start to become encompassed in that world. And then you get up and you go get coffee or you drive home. And you're like, oh, I'm back on Earth. But, there's this mental teleportation that happens, and you start to just absorbing that information all the time. You do start to feel like you're there, and it starts to become a home in a way.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. So anyways, back to the analog. So on Mars, Gale Crater, near this little mound of rocks, there were some rocks that were very planar, and they were sticking out, impossibly hinged, hanging over the surface. Wouldn't happen on Earth. That rock would fall down.
Right.
But on Mars, lower gravity, it can happen, right?
Wow.
You just imagine, so instead of the rock being, 5 centimeters overhang, it can now be 20.
Wow.
And it's okay. It's just the nature of the hardness of the rocks and the low gravity, so you start to see these weird effects. And, so you just have to think about that. Or like, we see these sand dunes, and they would have they would get like frost on them. And then in the end, they would have these gullies happen and like these big, long channels. I'm like, how do you do that with frost? And Dr. Serena Deniga, who's also JPL, her and some colleagues came up with this idea like, well, what if there's CO2 ice, which happens on Mars naturally? What happens when you put it on sand? And so they went out to the desert and they took a block of CO2 ice and they just they took a block of water ice and dumped on the sand on a dune, and it went down a little bit, not too much. They did that to CO2 ice, and it slid down like a sled.
Wow!
Because CO2 ice goes straight from solid to vapor phase, so it goes straight to gas, sublimation, and it creates a cushion. It's like a hovercraft.
Wow!
And it just slides right down.
Oh my god!
And the fact they even did, I think they actually sat on the block and did some sledding, which is even cooler. No pun intended.
As they should.
As they should, right? But so totally awesome analog experiment, but had to think about it differently. We don't get CO2 ice naturally on the Earth, thank goodness, because it has to be super cold to get it. So those are things like
creative thinking has to be a part of your everyday
has
life
to be.
there.
Yeah. And I think the other on the other personal level is like when you're doing like a lot of math, right? Quietly in the subconscious part of your brain is that part that's like, I want to create something, I want to do something cool and interesting to balance out. So I think that also comes to play that, it's natural to be creative. And also if you're just doing math or, some very technical aspect, you also your brain naturally wants to balance it with something creative. So there are a lot of people like, who are musicians, who are amazing artists. So that all kind of comes to play. Yeah. It's not a, sometimes we're, scientists can't be kind of a monolith and they're at a conference and, it's all very technical and we use all our big words.
You got to talk shop.
Yeah, we got to talk shop, as everyone does. But then there's the important part to communicate, like you said.
So next I asked Dr. Fred to take us back to his origin story, and he gave me the perhaps greatest introductory sentence I have ever heard.
So I grew up on a granite pluton.
Yes, so already we are into our first song title of the double theremin album. I grew up on a granite pluton, which we changed to I was raised on a granite pluton because it sounded more CCR, but instead of John Fogerty with a guitar, it's John Fogerty with two theremins.
This is true. So I
wait, hold on. That might be the best introductory statement I think I've ever heard. That could be the beginning of a novel right there.
It was a long, dark night on a very hard piece of rock made of granite.
I grew up on a granite pluton.
So I grew up in Quincy, Massachusetts. Quincy, Massachusetts is known for its granite. Literally, it's all these big granite plutons, which is just a granite that comes up from under the ground, which is what all granite does. Granite quarry at the end of my road. So lots of blasting when I was little, when the quarry was active. But my grandfather, big time like naturalist, like loved the woods, loved to go hiking, loved rocks, and so we would go out, go hiking down the end of the road in the woods and near the quarry, and he was like, oh, here's a rock, and he would tell me a story about the rock, and I'm like, that's so cool. A rock has a story. It formed. It has a journey. It has an adventure. It has a creation myth behind. I mean, myth, but a reality.
Yeah.
And so you can tell a lot about a simple rock and about the history of the Earth and how it formed and things that have happened in this area. Absolutely fascinated. Kind of jump-started my career in studying the Earth and geology. Fast forward, undergrad geology degree. Actually, wind up getting more looking at glaciers in Greece. And my master's did that. And I'm looking for a PhD, and decided planetary science was a cool thing to do. That or dinosaurs. It was a toss-up. Just came out with this recently. There's recently some job announcement, dinosaur biogeography, which is like, what's the environment the dinosaurs lived in? That was what I wanted to do at one point, but whatever, didn't happen. I became a Mars scientist, geologist, whatever. Whatever, I downgraded.
Right.
But I was wearing my PhD. I was in the ABD, which is all but dissertation rut, trying to just, suck in as much inspiration as possible while also, juggling the kids and the family and life and, having worked in between degrees, being a little bit older, which doesn't make life easier in this case. And I signed up for the Planetary Science Summer School at JPL. So it's basically you spend a summer, roughly a few weeks on telephone calls, telecons as we like to call them, and then you go there for a week or two and you design a planetary mission from scratch. Basically, like, here's the thing you want to do scientifically. How do you do it?
Yeah.
What are the instruments? What do you just fly by this planet or asteroid, or do you land there? Do you orbit? And then like, what instruments do you need to capture the science that you want to do? So I went to JPL and I was totally fascinated because here was this blend of the science and the engineering and putting it together and like, I hate the phrase soup to nuts, but that idea, right? From the raw ingredients, from the dream to the reality. And I was like, I am in. So I looked at postdoc opportunities, that study you do after your doctorate degree. And they're like, oh, we need someone to do mapping for landing sites on Mars. And I'm like,
wow.
Hey. So besides doing geology, mapping has been like my thing since undergrad, just how to make digital maps and for like all sorts of things. Like transportation planning was my first thing I ever did.
Really? Wow.
Totally like sideways into science. To science, but technically it's just map roads and how many people travel on it,
right?
Where are the town boundaries and all these kind of like called cadastral kind of mapping things for towns and cities. And I did watershed mapping and voting precincts in Ohio, digitizing all those, all sorts of kind of root level mapping things. And then I did planetary science, and because I learned about Mars images and how to process them and map them, and so I'm like, I'm in. And so I met Dr. Matt Golombek, who's basically the landing site person at JPL for Mars, and met him at a conference.
A quick side note about Dr. Matt Golombek. He's kind of a rock star to those of us who teach elementary school or have been doing so for a while, because he appeared in numerous anthology stories in elementary school anthologies about the Pathfinder mission from the early 2000s all the way through the late 2000s. And so I was a little starstruck when Dr. Fred mentioned that Matt Golombek was the one who encouraged him to finish his PhD. I'll let Dr. Fred tell the story.
Yeah, and so I met him, and he's like, hey, yeah, we'd love to have you come and do that. Just finish your degree, dude. And so that's super motivating.
Yeah, isn't it?
I wrote a whole bunch of my dissertation. I won't tell you the percentage, but it was a large percent because of that. And, because like they wanted me to start in the fall, and this was like March-ish.
Lighting a fire.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was like, okay, done. Doing it. Did it. And then went there, did postdoc landing site analysis. And then I got hired on to the Curiosity Rover mission.
Wow.
Because I did the base. I was creating the base maps that I used to test land the rover on for the Curiosity Rover. And at that time, there were 4 landing sites, Everswaldy Crater, not Hale, God. Holden Crater, Eberswaldy Crater, and Gale Crater. If I couldn't pull those out of my head, I would be in trouble. Okay, I managed it. So 4 landing sites. They just had the new instruments. They had like HiRISE, which is the high resolution science experiment. I'm misleading the words. Anyways, high resolution science experiment. Yeah, HiRISE. Anyway.
Hey guys, he's under the influence of a theremin right now.
I'm under the influence of theremin, and my brain's a little jacked up on the coffee. Probably a little overjacked, which is why I'm like my neurons are disconnecting. Anyways, takes very high resolution pictures of Mars, basically like the size of a laptop. Like we could see a laptop on Mars with this data. But they'd never really worked with it before. It was lots of images, a lot more data than they had ever worked with. Because kind of like all previous landers, like Pathfinder, both the Mars exploration rovers, Spirit and Opportunity, Viking landers, were like, what's there? I don't know, stuff. It looks smoothish. There's some sand and rocks, and the rocks aren't that big, we hope. Go land there. So really blind. So, like, I know, of course, you remember, you would get that image back from Mars, and you're like, whoa, that's what the surface looks like. And that was absolutely the truth. We had almost zero idea what the surface, not zero idea what the surface was like, but pretty close to, like, I don't know.
Right. Just waiting for it to come back, and then
you get to see.
Yeah.
Now, absolute opposite. We know what the surface looks like. There are fine details, like we can't see individual sand grains. We can tell you there's hills. If your couch was on Mars, we can say, like, oh, there's a couch and there's seats, and, like, we can tell that from data we have now. So it's always cool to land on Mars. We always see something interesting, but it's like we know the general landscape. So I was helping summing all those maps, which then went into the landing site analysis to pick Gale Crater, and then working on the mission.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's how I got there.
Man, that's exciting.
Yeah, but not like I'm for. I want to be a
right.
Mars
It's not
mapper.
Like a straight path.
Absolutely not a straight path, and but I did have many so. My first internship was this transportation planning agency, mapping. Like, hey, do you want a job? And I'm like, no, I want to go back and get my master's. Okay. A couple years later, get my master's. Hey, you want to work at this institute doing government administration, watershed mapping, stuff like? No, I want to get my PhD. Stuff like that. Just a time where I'm like, no, I want to study more. I want to learn more, and I like, okay, I could take this job and I'll be 50 someday. I'll be my age, and life will be happy and great.
Right.
Would have been awesome jobs, all of them, but there's just something more that, like, no, I gotta do something different, something more, something that evolves, that's creative, but in that sciencey way, and there's just it kind of pushes you on these paths. So yeah.
And then could there possibly be anything that is constantly evolving more than mapping the surface of Mars?
Yeah.
There are.
Well, you mean different planets?
Oh, okay.
Or
Yeah. I mean, like right now, as far as like other jobs that there could be. It sounds to me like you've pretty much hit the jackpot as far as the constant evolving of what is new and exciting.
Right. Yeah. Wow. I have not. Try not to think about other things. No. I think
we set him off on this episode into another pathway.
No more Mars. I'm going to. Yeah. I think things in my mind is like climate research and climate change research. But I don't know what I could contribute. People are kind of way far ahead of me on that, so I'm happy in my little Mars world.
Very cool.
Landing site stuff. Mostly. But trying to push out to other places like maybe the moon or Europa or all those places. Which we want to send spacecraft to down to the surface and do stuff.
Right.
So that's exciting. And then human landing sites are pretty exciting. I'm really pretty stoked on like the like going to Mars and like putting humans there. Like, where do you go?
Right.
What's the most important parts? And I find some of those things fascinating.
So next, I asked Dr. Fred where he saw Mars exploration in the next 30, 50, and 100 years. And somehow, as I was asking this question, the presence of Werner Herzog creeped back into the conversation. He keeps finding his way into these episodes. I don't know how. But, there was a documentary he made where Werner interviewed Elon Musk about Mars. He asked Elon Musk, he's like, well, we need people who will go and live there. And he goes, I will go. He's like, you're volunteering? He's like, yes, I will go to Mars. So what is, obviously, I guess what I'm speaking of specifically with this question is, human involvement on Mars. Where do you guys think we are 30, 50, and then 100 years?
Yeah. 30 years, we should, hopefully, maybe have people who have reached the planet, reached the surface. Well, actually, it depends. So the hard part of Mars is landing. Second hard part of Mars is coming back. But landing is but those do kind of do and play. So you could send humans to Mars, but not necessarily go to the surface. So there's some proposals out there.
So how would that work?
Oh yeah. So you go in a spacecraft, you orbit around Mars. You never try to land. You send robots to the surface and you drive them. You joystick them. So we can't joystick rovers from Earth because the time delay, it's too far away. So it takes at least 8 minutes for you to send something and get something back. Usually it's longer. It's more like 40 minutes. So, by the time you've driven off the cliff, you don't know. So there's that time delay. So if you're there, though, if you're in orbit, you can just literally use a joystick, use your game controller, and drive the rover all over the place.
So you just send gamers to Mars.
Basically, yeah. So
gamers, if you're listening, do all your homework, okay?
That's right. You ever seen that movie, The Last Starfighter? That's you, except it's not a box that you stand up with. It's your gaming console. Yeah, and so you could do it telerobotically, is usually what they call it. So you're in orbit, you're getting feedback directly from the rovers or whatever the spacecraft is, and you're guiding them. So that's one way. Wow. That's kind of the easier way to do it. And then because if you want to go back, you don't have to launch off the surface and pray the rocket doesn't explode when you're launching. Excuse me, and then have to join up with some other spacecraft, which then takes you back to Earth. You can just stay in orbit and go. Yeah. That's kind of like the easy version. So the first version might be humans go to Mars, might even just do a flyby, right? Just like, hi, Mars, wow, bye, Mars. Right. It was fun.
Like with the lunar missions.
Yeah, with the lunar missions too, right? Yeah. So all the human explorations started with you fly by the object of interest, the planet or the moon. You orbit it. You land something on it robotically. And so you know what surface is like, and then you send humans. Mars, where we've done all the things except for sending humans, but Mars is also much exponentially farther away than the moon is, and then you've got this problem. Like the moon is perfect; it has no atmosphere, so you use retro rockets. That's how you land. Mars is a bit of a jerk.
And there it is, the second theremin song title. Of course, Dr. Fred actually said there, Mars is a bit of a jerk. But for the song title that we created for his faux theremin, double theremin album, we called it just Mars is a Jerk.
Has just enough atmosphere to make it cool for seeing storms. However, it also has enough atmosphere that will burn you up coming down, but it doesn't quite have enough atmosphere to slow you down all the way. So you can, you have to go from supersonic to subsonic, which is like, 1,000 miles per hour to, a few hundred miles per hour. But then you can't stop it on a parachute. You have to have some rocket propulsion. So you have to do these weird hybrid mechanisms of a parachute and retro rockets at the last second, and then or you bounce on the ground or do balloons and all sorts of things. But robots, they're kind of tough. They can deal with it. Humans, they go like a little gentler. So you've got to solve that problem of getting humans to Mars, but
safely,
they got to safely land and. Most humans want to come back.
Yeah.
Unlike
Werner Herzog.
Yes, unlike Werner Herzog,
I will go,
and I will stay, and I will live. And the other thing is that, let's say, even if you're going one way, right? You have to answer a question. How long do you want to live on the surface?
Yeah.
10 hours, 10 days, 10 weeks, 10 months, 10 years? Like, what's that limit? Right.
And how long is long enough to get the information that we need, too?
Yeah. Well, how long is it enough for that person to stay there? How long do they want to live, basically? Yeah. How much more of your life do you want to experience? Wow, and all those have started to have an exponential increase in resources. Oxygen.
Right.
Food. Water, warmth, shelter, all those things. These
are literally questions that we've never had to answer before, right?
Never, ever. Yeah. Well, the one analog is Antarctica.
Oh, okay.
Not a perfect analog, but it is a remote place where we have to send almost everything except for water. They do melt the ice and they get water that way. Certainly, they've got oxygen. So, but it's remote, and you have to send people in. All your supplies in, and so you have to constantly resupply. But, that's Antarctica, which is way, way far away, but only
still
not
on the same
compared,
planet.
but still on the same planet, right? And you don't have to worry about oxygen and water. And water is heavy. Oxygen is plentiful on the Earth, not so much on Mars.
Yeah.
So those are the problems you have to solve, and then, most people want to come back.
Right.
How do you do that? Now you've got to get people off the surface. We've only done that on the moon. And with the lunar missions, for those who don't know, the maximum 14 days. Why 14 days? That's how many days of sunlight you get when you're on the moon, because then the moon, the Earth, the moon rotate, and then the dark side comes. Right. So you can only be on the surface about 14 days, which is, 14 days in total if you landed at the beginning of the cycle and you left at the end. Generally, they were there for a shorter period of time. But that's a limiting factor.
Right.
But on Mars, you're going to be there 24/7, and then you have to get back off. And so, anyways, so it's tricky. So then you have to get off the surface. And then how long do you stay there? So there's two options for going to Mars. You can, if you want to come back, you can, technically three, stay there forever, right? The two, spend 30 days on the surface and then come back, or spend almost 2 years, Earth years on the surface and then come back. The trade is, if you do 30 days on the surface, you spend a long time in space. I'm trying to remember the numbers. It's like the mission is almost 2 years. You only spend about about a month on the surface, and there's time you're in a tin can in space.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
Radiation problems and just
and you're in a
tin can in space, right? If you ever get the chance to go see how big spacecraft are currently, let me tell you, they're small.
Yeah.
They're a closet, and they cram you in. I went to Johnson Space Center, went to their place where they do simulations, and they have different capsules, like a Soyuz capsule and a Apollo capsule, blah, 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 and a space shuttle mock-up. I looked at the Soyuz capsule. It was incredible. I mean, it was scary. It was like, that's like a shoe closet. That's smaller than a shoe closet.
Right.
How did you get 3 people in there? They just did. And and I was with 2 people who one person who worked at JSC, Johnson Space Center, one person who worked at JPL, and they both applied to be astronaut candidates. I was like, wow, I don't know if I could do that. And they both looked at me deadpan and were like, astronauts don't care. Astronauts don't care. They just want to go. They don't care how they go. They don't care if it's like sealed in carbonite. They just want to go up. Wow. They don't care what they
You're just built that way. I guess some people are just built that way.
I think so.
Mentally.
Or you have to become that way. Like, you're like, you're going to live in a closet where you're going to eat and sleep and poop. And that's what you're going to do. Yeah. Okay.
Sounds good.
Do I get to go to space? Yeah, let's go. I'm ready. I am ready. So I will go. So it's just a certain type of mentality. They're those people.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great for them.
Yeah.
I'm not doing a Soyuz capsule.
Yeah.
A little bigger. I need a little more room.
That's why the science fiction movies always have these nice spacious
big,
accommodations.
Yeah, that's right.
What most people would want.
Yeah.
The reality is quite different.
Quite different. Yeah. Okay. So sorry. Back to your talk. 30 years. Humans, I'll just say to Mars. That could be flyby, that could be orbiting, that could be actually getting to the surface. 50 years, it all depends on like commitment, right? I mean, so the moon, we went to the moon, we landed at a bunch of different places. We didn't really go to the same place and install infrastructure, a habitat, leave a rover for the next people. That's really the only way that you're going to have a sustainable presence, like on Antarctica. So that's where the Antarctica analog comes in, where, we send people there, they come back, but we built houses and we leave vehicles and planes and stuff. So, so people can have a continued, like a scientific, conference center is the wrong word. Like a research outpost. So you could do that, and then you have a continual presence.
Right.
That would be great in 50 years, but it does require you to like once you go, if you really want to do that, you have to keep going.
Yeah.
Every 2 years, You got to be sending junk to Mars. No, you have to be sending habitats. And in the beginning, there's a lot of talk about living off the land, in situ resource utilization, ISRU, which means you go there and instead of bringing all your water, you dig up the ice from Mars or from rocks and you convert it to water and oxygen and rocket fuel and stuff like that. Just because, if you're constantly relying on Earth, you are constantly relying on Earth.
Yeah.
If anything breaks, the rocket explodes. It happens, right? Your supply cycle doesn't happen. How long can you live on the surface by yourself? You probably want to grow food there. Do you have materials? Do you bring a cement truck full of cement to build your habitat? Or do you figure out how to make cement blocks from Mars materials
that's
right?
there,
You bring the little bit of glue or additives to make cement. But we haven't done that before either. And it's super low pressure, super cold, kind of limited materials that you have. So, it's going to require a huge commitment, and what does commitment mean? Mostly it's the dollar bill, right? And it probably, we want it to be international because it's a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
But, can come with huge reward, huge scientific reward, huge exploration reward. And always with space exploration is, it's kind of like long-term research. So the example I like is your cell phone, right? Why are cell phones so small and powerful and energy efficient? Space exploration. You know why? It's expensive and difficult to send things into space. They have to be, space exploration is always about low volume, low energy, low mass, which is what? Your cell phone, right? Remember the old cell phones? There was like a suitcase and this clunky brick you put inside your head that was probably irradiating you and giving you a CT scan or an X-ray scan. You want to make things small, light, energy efficient. Drills, like, when they repaired things on the outside spacecraft, they realized they don't want a cable drill with power because that cable gets in the way and gets tangled. They made a cordless drill. You're welcome, construction people.
Right.
They developed fuel cells for the missions because they didn't want to, burn oil in the mission because that's pollution. Fuel cells, very clean energy. Supply hydrogen. What's your waste product? Water. Oh, bummer, right?
Yeah, right.
Can't do anything with that. Solar panels, super efficient. Why? Because they need, they want low volume, low mass, and get energy out of it. So all those things kind of, come out. And then there's also all the medicine stuff, which are, like osteoporosis is a huge problem in space. It's also a huge problem in half of our population for the most part. Bone loss. So, new drugs and things like that. And just, space makes you have hard problems. And from those hard problems, you get solutions you can use on Earth. So, so there's benefits there. And then 100 years, that would be a sustainable presence. But, it comes at a cost and a price and a time scale, and it requires drive. There's always like this pushback, like, why can't NASA get its act together? It's like, well, NASA doesn't exactly, we give you all the plans. We don't give you the agenda. Right? That is driven by other people. We just, we do what we're told to do. There's no lack of plans, no lack of capability, but you need you need a focused mission that's not, for the moon, right? That's the example, right? It wasn't, we're going to do this in 1 year. It's like we do it in 10 years. Well, 10 years is way beyond any one, let's just say president without getting into all that. Right? It has to be the sustained multi-year, multi-decade process. So, yeah. So one can only hope, and, Mars is one destination and, the moon, of course, is a big focus now. We hope, and that can also be a launching point for Mars. And so, hopefully, I think it's more just like sustained presence, kind of like in space. Like, we've been, or like on Mars, like we've been on Mars since, continuously since 2000. That's what we want. Like, keep doing that. Like, there's always
continuous presence.
There's always a robot on Mars doing something. There's always spacecraft around there, and then hopefully always have people there, doing research.
And speaking of people here on Earth, it does require incredible people here on Earth to be doing the work on this end, right? So Dr. Fred Calef is one of those people, no doubt. So thank you, Dr. Fred. We're going to pause the interview right here, and part 2 of this interview, as I already mentioned, will take place in the next episode, where we will also have the next 3 songs in the Geology Folk Song Medley, and then, of course, at the end of that episode, we will play the Geology Folk Song Medley in its entirety. So my thanks to Dr. Fred Calef of JPL, and thank you guys for listening to the Amoeba People podcast. Don't forget to give us a rating and write a review. That will help us out immensely, and other people can find out about this podcast as well. Man, what a 2019. Thanks to all of you guys out there for supporting us. You know, we put out an album, we started this podcast, we did some shows with Bill Nye the Science Guy and the Planetary Society. Man, we just had a stellar 2019. Thanks to all of you. Onward to 2020!